Hi, and welcome to the X22 Report Spotlight. Today's guest is Bill Murphy. In 1999, Bill became the chairman of the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, that's GATA. He is trying to expose the manipulation of the gold price by the gold cartel, and he's been working at this for quite a while. And we are seeing the manipulation by banks, central banks, and others, and he is ripping away the illusion of gold and silver and what the real price is supposed to be. And I am very happy to have him on the X22 Report Spotlight. Bill, welcome to the Spotlight.
Great to be here, Dave. Thanks much for having me.
Hey, thanks for being on here. And I wanted to start out with the manipulation because we are seeing different banks accused of manipulating the precious metals market, like Deutsche Bank, HSBC, Scotiabank, UBS. Does it go much deeper than these couple of banks?
Well, it's a great question, Dave, and it does. When GATA first started, in 1999, I started GATA with my colleague Chris Powell. We thought it was just the bullion banks manipulating the price. We realized that was the case after long-term capital management blew up the big hedge fund, and the Fed came in and bailed them out, and I could see that every time gold was going above 300, it got stopped. But anyway, we realized over the next year that it was much bigger than that, and that it involved the U.S. government and the Fed, the Treasury, Bank for International Settlements, other central banks, and so on. And in a way, the banks were the agents for this major operation.
You're saying the government is actually behind a lot of this. How about the central bank?
Well, yeah. The Fed is behind it. The Fed and the Treasury and Exchange Stabilization Fund, yes.
So they're all behind this. Now, the question I'm sure a lot of people have is, what is the purpose of suppressing the precious metals market? Why are they so concerned about gold and silver?
Well, again, it's another question. It's right on the money that it has to do with the interest rates and the dollar to protect them. And at the same time, if you think about it, every time gold goes up or goes up sharply, it's something bad for the money and power, the establishment. It's always a negative. It's never good. Oh, gold's going up because all is so well. It's like gold has become the barometer of U.S. financial market health. So they have taken upon themselves to keep it suppressed and under control at all times. And they've been doing it for a very long time now, and it just goes on and on and on. And of course, we'll get into what I think is coming, but in the meantime, that's the way it is.
They don't want individuals to see what's really happening in the economy. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. Again, think of a thermometer, barometer. In other words, if it rises sharply, there's something wrong. It's an unhealthy situation. So they want that to be diffused, and they got involved in doing this, and they just kept at it and at it, and now they've got themselves in a box in a way because it's gone on for so long, and the physical gold and silver situation is going to be a big problem for them. But in the meantime, the manipulation goes on.
So when you talk about suppression, what actually do they do to suppress gold and silver? How are they able to do it?
Well, it has to do with physical gold and the paper markets. Initially, way back when, and how I got started was I was working with a fellow named Frank Veneroso, who wrote something called the Gold Book. And he had learned from the Central Bank of England that the gold loans at the times were about, gold loans were about 8,000 tons. And the establishment had them as zero. In other words, the gold cartel, as we would call their central banks, were taking gold from the physical gold from the central banks and leasing it out, putting physical supply into the marketplace. And that physical supply is what helps meet demand, and that's how they press the price. And then over the years, they've been using the paper market considerably, especially the futures market, to affect how the price trades. In other words, they hit it and the physical market follows. It's like the tail wagging the dog.
With all this suppression that they're doing, do you see precious metals right now moving up?
Well, of course, as you might suspect, the answer would be yes. I mean, right now, and they have been for years because of this price suppression scheme, they're at artificially low levels. And it's a simple but true way of looking at it. I mean, if gold had kept pace with inflation, it would be at least double what it is today. And that's just if things were normal. And then silver is a whole different situation. We don't quite, as far as people I know, don't quite understand where they've got the physical silver to do their thing, but it's like that's their kryptonite. And when silver, and we think it's going to explode, it's going to go berserk because of what they've done. They're just going to run out of enough physical supply to meet demand, and this gold cartel, as I've labeled it, is just going to be overpowered. And it's a tipping point that's coming.
Well, a lot of people say that the ratio between gold and silver, they're completely off. I think it's 80-1 right now. And they're saying that this is completely far off them from what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be like something like 10-1 or something like that. Do you see silver and gold getting back to that ratio?
Well, it's actually not. It was 80-1. You're right. It's come down to about 69.
Oh, okay.
Off its highs, and it's historically it's more like 30 and 40, and it's been as low as 15s. And because of what they've done, and when silver, and I believe the trigger number will be 21. Right now it's 19. Takes that out, you could see the silver price move up to 50 like it's done twice before in history, but then it's going to go much beyond that. I think up to 100 and probably much more, because they just have run out, and they've used all this silver to aid in their gold price suppression scheme because they're related. And they got involved in doing it, and now they've got themselves in a box, as I mentioned earlier, because they're going to run out of physical silver to keep going at what they are.
But what's going to stop them from using the paper market? Can they continually just create more contracts and just throw it at the silver market to keep the price of silver down?
Yes and no. They can for a period of time, but every day there is a physical market where people need silver and people need to sell it. And the price is fixed in London every day, and that's usually what the daily price is in silver as it is in gold. And no matter what they do, at the end of the day, which is actually the beginning of our day, there's a physical price, and you've got to have enough supply to meet the demand. So they can affect the price, and by doing what they do in the paper market, they can affect what the suppliers will want to do and get rid of silver to protect the price that they already have and so on. But they're running on fumes now, at least we think they are, and we're getting down to the point when they just won't have that physical silver again to meet that demand, and then it's going to force something that's going to be spectacular.
If silver, you're saying, if it starts to move up, like you're saying, it hits 21, and then it starts moving up, what happens with gold? Does that also start moving up?
Yes, and that's when your ratio, as you were talking about, will start to come way down. Silver will lead the way. And they're petrified of this occurring, which is why they've been stopping silver the past month or two when it gets above 20, and they don't want it to get close to 21 because they know that's their trigger point. And there's a lot going on, we think, in silver behind the scenes. But in the meantime, J.P. Morgan and the gang that's heavily short continue to keep the pressure on.
This manipulation that we're seeing with gold and silver, this is continuing. And we mentioned this before previously. The economy is tied to gold and silver. So as silver and gold continually rises, what happens to the economy? I mean, what are people going to see? I mean, how they're going to explain that the dollar is devaluing, maybe the economy is not doing well? Because, like you said, this is going to be a signal that something's wrong with the economy. So when gold and silver, like you're saying, starts to move up, what is the rest of the economy going to look like?
Well, from my simplistic standpoint, in a way, it shouldn't have to mean anything. But what has happened, they're going to make it into something, make a big deal out of it. Instead of it, let it be the free market process work. Eventually, when gold and silver explode like we think they're going to do, it's because they will have lost control and not be able to keep it where it is with all the different ways that they've come up with to keep the markets where they are. But because they've thwarted the free market process, when it goes, it's likely to be part of the reason it's going to be we're going to be in such chaos. I mean, people know all about the low interest rates and zero interest rates and quantitative easing and printing money, and they're really hitting the wall. there's not much more that they can do, and they've reached another tipping point. What do they do now? My old colleague Ray Dalio of Bridgewater Associates, who has the largest hedge fund in the world, was on CNBC today, and he's talking about we're in a dangerous situation, and there isn't too many more measures they can take except to go back to the well and do more of the same with printing more money and so on, trying to prop up asset prices and keep the economy growing. But we're in a real difficult situation, and part of it's been created because they didn't let the free market process work. Market corrections, let us go into a recession when we needed to be to clear things out and have interest rates at more reasonable levels historically. And what are they going to do now? Even the thought of raising the interest rate is pathetic. A quarter of a point has the market, dropping 300 or 400 points. Well, this is silly because what they would raise rates to today would have been unthinkable 4 or 5 years ago. That's how bad the situation really is, and that's why they want to keep gold under control, because they don't want people to realize that we're in a really tough situation now.
And it's very interesting because Russia, China, they've been purchasing a lot of physical gold. Has the United States, from your research or what you've been looking at, have they been purchasing gold and silver, or do we even have gold and silver?
Well, that's a big issue. We're supposed to have 8,136 tons, but there hasn't in our vaults. But there's never been an official Fed audit. I think the last audit was in the Eisenhower administration. No one really knows what gold is there. And if it's there, is it someone else's gold that we've exchanged gold with? There's no accounting for it, and we don't believe that that the United States gold is anywhere near 8,000 tons. And regarding, Russia and China, yes, they have been accumulating, and we know that they know what Gada knows regarding what has been going on in the gold market, in the sense that the central banks in the West don't have the gold they say they have anymore, and they know what's coming. Gada's had 4 international conferences, and one of Putin's top economic advisors, Andrei Bykov, was at 2 of them, and we know that he got the word back to the Russian government about what's really going on. And the Chinese have followed Gada. We know that from different things that have been released. I've had conference calls with their wealth funds, and they know what Gada knows, and they keep buying.
Now, what's very interesting is that we see Russia and China, like you said, and we've been talking about, they're buying physical, but we're also seeing Switzerland and Norway, the central banks there, they're printing money, and they're not buying precious metals. They're buying and they're accumulating precious metals mining shares. Why do you think, first, why don't you think they're in the market buying precious metals, the physical? Why do you think they're in there purchasing the mining shares instead?
Well, this is new news, and it's amusing in a way, Dave, because if you think of, again, the central banks as a club, and especially the Western central banks, they may not want to be seen buying physical gold, taking on their colleagues, which are secretly suppressing the price. I mean, they all know what's going on, so the way to get around that would be to buy the gold that's in the ground to the miners themselves. So it's kind of it brings smiles to someone like myself to think what they're doing is circumvent their own crowd, and that's one of the reasons that the mining shares just went bonkers this year. I mean, the HUI, which is an index, went from 99 to 280, and it's in a little correction now. But most of the corrections in the miners this year have been minor to non-existent because of what you just mentioned. Even central banks are coming in buying them.
When we look at this entire situation with gold and silver and the economy, what should the everyday person, should they go into the paper market? Should they buy and hold physical gold and silver? What do you think they should do at this point?
Well, if I'm correct, some big moves are just barely begun. Gold went to 1,900 and corrected back to below 1,100. Now it's above 1,300, and silver's been to $50. 5, 6 years ago, and now it's back only at 19. As I mentioned earlier, I think it's going to 100 and more. So again, I'm very prejudiced, but yes, owning gold and silver and taking possession of it is something that everyone should look at. And I think the mining shares have a long way to go because of what's coming in the precious metals prices. So it's something that should be looked at carefully by people who want to be diversified, if nothing else.
Now, what about those people who are out there? They're saying that gold is going to be dropping below 1,000. They're saying there's no way that gold is going to be moving up. They're saying it's going to be dropping back below 1,000. What do you say to those people? Is that even possible right now?
Well, for someone who's looking for the numbers we just talked about, it's hard for me to conceive of something like that. You never know if there was some sort of economic debacle and there was a liquidity crisis and people were just panicking to get cash any way they could, everywhere they could. It's conceivable it could happen briefly, but I just can't imagine it. Of course, if anything ever did happen like that, it would make the eventual prices even that much higher. So I think when we get anywhere close to that, or things are going wrong, the government's going to go back to what the only thing they can do left, and the Fed and so on, is to print more money and to keep things from going into a depression or staying there. So I just think it's a win-win situation, and it's hard for me to conceive of gold and silver going down much from here.
When we're looking at all of this and we see the economy completely falling apart, you're looking at gold and silver, you're saying that it's going to start to rise. Their days are numbered where they can't suppress it anymore. And when you're looking at it, you're saying if we hit 21 for silver, that is the signal. Is there a signal for gold? Is there a price signal where people should say, okay, we hit 1,400 or we hit 1,500, gold is also going to take off?
It's funny. I hadn't really thought too much about it. It's much more. It seems to be a much more opaque situation than silver is, and I'm just using it only because of my own analysis. When silver was at 1850, we thought that would be the initial trigger, and it was. We got up to 21, and J.P. Morgan and the rest of them have come back and stopped it. But silver's more technically because it's sitting here and staring at you. Gold, you could come up with any number. I just think that when silver takes off, it will be a trigger for gold, and it's hard to know exactly what that number is. 1,400 is as good as any.
So let me ask you, a lot of people are worried about this because we saw it back in the Great Depression where the government came in and they said, listen, we need your gold. We'll give you, whatever, I think it was $20 an ounce for gold. And then they upped it to 35 ounces a little bit later. Should people be worried if they're owning gold that the government might come in and do this once again in the future?
Well, yes, it is of interest. It's just hard for me to imagine something like that to make gold such a big deal because so few Americans own it. Who are they confiscating it from? And then to make a big deal out of it it puts a focus on gold. So it's hard for me the rest of the world would laugh at us. Well, what's wrong with America? Who cares about gold? Think about it. They're the ones that make it a big deal, and things can change down the road. And if some people are talking about gold being reset at a much higher price and so on, but I just can't imagine them, stooping to confiscating people's gold when so few Americans own it. And what are they going to do about silver? How are they going to even bring that into the equation?
Well, that was my next question. Is do you think silver is something that everyone should have because the government's really not looking at silver at all? Really, they always talk about gold. They never really talk that much about silver.
That's correct, and it's interesting you bring that up because again I'm smiling because how would we know what they're doing, but then how would they ever explain that to the public about that they can't own silver? And they go, what? What are you talking about? So yeah, it's even that fear could be another thing that could send silver even more bonkers, and it's very interesting actually.
So going forward, going into this fall, going into 2017, when do you think that gold or especially silver, is going to all of a sudden break out. Do you have a time frame for this?
Well, any of us who've had a time frame are always wrong. It's just the way it is, and you know, we're talking about taking on the richest, most powerful people in the world, and they're going to extend what they're doing as long as they can, and especially now in the United States with our election coming up, the last thing and especially with the establishment, you know, wanting Hillary Clinton because that's their person, Republican or Democrat. They're going to do everything they can to keep gold and silver under control. So and that's exactly what we're seeing right now. So I would think it would be sometime, you know, after the election, and it's liable to happen out of nowhere. In other words, it'll just be an event. Something will trigger it, and then off we go. And that'd be my best guess.
So when you say after the election, actually many people are saying things might happen right before or right after the election, where the economy might just completely fall apart. But you said there might be some type of an event. What do you mean by an event that might trigger it?
Well, if we go back over the last number of years, I'll give you a good example. What happened, which I'd love to but mention, is Brexit. In other words, everyone thought, you know, England was going to stay in the European Union, and then it was a total surprise to the markets anyway. What happened in gold and silver, because the bad guys, the gold cartel, were caught off guard, gold went up nearly $100. And silver was flying, and it's because they weren't prepared for what was going to happen, and that was totally unexpected. So it's going to be some kind of event that people aren't aware of, that sends shockwaves into the financial market system and gets people scared, and people are going to want to own gold and silver for protection. And so it'll be something like that, or a Lehman Brothers, something that's going to come out of the woodwork, which nobody expects, and it could be involved in derivatives, which is, you know, the use of, you know, paper instruments, which has gone absolutely bonkers in the bullion banks, the gold cartel, and so on, to do what they want to do financially. And you could have like a nuclear explosion where, say, a Deutsche Bank, you know, blows up, and that leads to, you know, their counterparty risk issues with other banks, and it just feeds on itself, and then all of a sudden the world wants to own gold, which isn't there.
Yeah, if we see the derivative market completely collapse, personally, I think it's going to be a chain reaction where it's going to hit bank after bank after bank. At that point, I think the system is just going to come down, just like we saw back in 2008 with the subprime securities, when everyone was defaulting on their mortgages, and these AAA securities completely imploded on themselves. And then all of a sudden we saw, you know, AIG, we saw Lehman, Bear Stearns all start to completely fall apart, and then the banks needed a bailout. And I think this derivative problem is almost the same exact thing, but much, much worse. And I think you're right. If this does collapse, it's going to send the precious metals market very, very high. And I think people are going to see this. Can the central banks, the other banks that are in collusion with all of this, can they keep this going much longer?
And the answer is no, because of getting back to their big problem is the physical market, that they've gone through a lot of the central bank supply to meet demand. How they've got, as I mentioned earlier, how they've done it with silver the past couple of years. The smartest guys I know, supply demand guys, Eric Sprott and David Morgan, they can't figure it out. They're just going to hit the wall, and that's when the game's over. It's checkmate. And so, and the clock is ticking on this one. And I don't think we have too much longer to wait. And it's going to be spectacular, especially silver, because we think that that's where they're, again, the kryptonite situation. When the supply and the people are not going to know what to do, you'll see incredible price action. So they are going to hit the wall, and it's going to be sooner rather than later.
Bill, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. Once again, how can people see your work?
Well, again, Dave, great questions. I really mean that. And as far as myself, I write a financial website, gold and silver, LeMetropoleCafe.com, and People can sign up for a 2-week free trial. And my colleague Chris Powell at GATA.org puts out stuff all the time, and he does a great job, and people can get on that list for free. We've been a tag team going after what he called the bad guys since 1999, and we're going to keep at it till we win the day.
Bill, once again, really, I appreciate you coming on the X22 Report Spotlight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave.